didn't hear me at all, but we were just doing the minutes, and they were, a motion was made to approve the minutes, and it was seconded, and we have to do a roll call vote since you're at home, so I'll ask for your vote first. I'm sorry?
Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah, we're not hearing you, but very, very well, very
I
faint.
think I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Okay. Christine Morrow,
Aye.
David Rimmer, Robert Munch, Lauren Cass. Okay. We'll move on to the superintendent's report.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first item that I'm going to just kind of skip around, we have a field trip request, but I want to kind of go right to the highlights and recommendations and then circle back. So what I'd like to do tonight is highlight a couple of exceptional students that have achieved something that I think is worth a commendation from the superintendent on behalf of the school committee. And so we have 3 students who have been named MIAA student ambassadors for the year. And they're Julian Howard, Grace Elliott, and Mary Elliott. And so we're issuing an official letter recognizing their achievement. And it reads, "This letter is an official commendation from the superintendent of schools to acknowledge you being honored as an MIAA student ambassador. Serving as an ambassador is a significant achievement, and Lenox is pleased to have you representing the district at statewide meetings of high school athletic representatives. Your commitment to the areas of community service, student leadership, sportsmanship, and wellness is an inspiration to all as you model a healthy and balanced life as a student athlete. The selection as an MIAA ambassador is one of many accolades that you are sure to garner during your high school career. You should keep this letter to share with others as an honor or award that sets you apart as a member of your school community. Thank you for dedicating your time and energy to promoting student wellness and representing Lenox Public Schools. Your integrity on the courts and fields, in the classroom, and in the community not only speaks volumes about your character, but also serves as an example for all those around you to aspire toward. Sincerely, Mark Olson, Superintendent of Schools." And so I've invited our athletes to join us tonight, and I think we only have one present, and I think the other ones are actually playing a soccer game this evening that I think started about 6 minutes ago. So just ask those who are here to offer a round of applause for those athletes, and then I will share with you your letter.
Congratulations.
Thank you. All right, it's great to be here. You're coming, all right.
Congratulations. Yeah, nice to meet you as well. Thank you so much for being part of this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job, Julia.
Thank you.
It's great.
Yeah.
And thank you for indulging the small change in schedule, but I do like to allow our students to leave early so they can get back home and get their homework and those types of things. So
Sorry.
thank you for joining us.
I suspect she's going to the soccer game.
Yes. Organizations, the Wells Gallery at the Lenox Library, along with the Chamber of Commerce and the Witt Gallery, put together an Art Week in the Berkshires event for the community. And as part of that, they asked for student art submissions. So we had over 100 submissions received. And Chloe Inhelder was ranked best in show for her piece called Man's World. And so she won a $250 scholarship. And then 2 honorable mentions went to Cameron Odell and Sabrina Lewis, who each earned a $100 scholarship for their artwork as well. So I wanted to give a special praise to them as well for coming out and putting together those pieces and being judged to be amongst the best of show. And if you want to check out the show, it's still on display, and you can view that at the Wells Gallery. So now we'll go back to the top of our superintendent report, which is a field trip request coming to us from the English department. And so they are seeking permission from the school committee to travel out of state for an encore field trip to see a live performance of the literary works of Edgar Allan Poe, The Telltale Heart, The Raven, and more. This will be held at the Egg in Albany, New York. It will require a bus to transport 55 students, along with faculty chaperones and chaperones who are also volunteering from families as well. So I leave this to the school committee to consider approving the field trip. The only cost to the district is the cost of the transportation.
And I'm here just if you have any questions beyond the questions in the note.
Okay, so this is coming up in
December, it's going to be in December.
December, yeah.
Early December. It was postponed for snow and then for COVID. So the tickets were already paid for, and there's a credit for those. But we, as we have in our field trip line in the English department this year, we need a request, and I think we put that forward. There's funds available.
Yeah, and it's also an out of town,
And it's out.
out of state field trip. So we have to approve it. So I'd accept a motion to approve the field trip to New York, to the Egg in Albany.
Chairman, a motion to approve the encore field trip to the English department. I'll second it.
Okay, is there a discussion?
Does that mean that we previously approved this trip if we had purchased tickets in the past?
I mean, I think because extra funds are being sought for the buses, I just assumed it needed to come before you, so.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I just wondered if we
It's
had.
a different set of students. We require the list, we don't publish the list, but we require the list of time.
And the expense for out-of-state travel is always, it's always a significant, it's relative.
Any other questions or comments?
Sounds really cool.
Okay, hearing none, we'll call for a roll call vote. Christine Morrow,
Christine Morrow, aye.
Megan Kirby,
Aye.
Bob Vaughn, aye.
David Rimler, aye. Todd Munch, aye. Warren Foss, aye.
Okay, it's approved. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. Nice to see you all. Nice to be here.
Remember, you can see it in 3D.
Exactly.
All right, next up is a updated enrollment report. So every year, school districts are required to report to the federal government on October 1st, a snapshot of our enrollment. And so at our last meeting, we talked about the fact this was coming up. We thought it would be a good exercise to compare our enrollment from last October 1st to this October 1st to kind of give us two snapshots in time that we can use in terms of a sense-making activity as we try to think about our enrollment and the changes therein. So we also were asked to try to model it in a slightly different fashion that made it somewhat more accessible. And so Amy and I endeavored to do it, and this is our first go at it. So if this doesn't work, we can also modify this and present it in another way. But you'll notice that there's two kind of lanes of information. So the top lane, what that demonstrates is the change year over year by cohort. So we're looking at cohort survivorship, for lack of a better term, meaning that these students stay with us from one grade to the next. So students who were kindergartners in 2020 would be first graders this year. So we would look kind of down the step at each of those grade levels. And it's broken out in different units of analysis. We have residence, choice, tuition, then all those numbers put together in an aggregate total amount, and then also an opportunity to see the percent choice and the differences therein year over year. So all total, we are down about 20 students, or actually not about 20 students, but down 20 students from last year at this time to the current. And it looks like the largest losses come in a couple of grades in particular. At the secondary level, most pronounced, and that's at the 11th grade and also 9th grade, where we lost 6 students and 8 students at both of those points. We did previously share that some of that sounds like it was lost to students who opted to pursue programs at Taconic that were centered around the trades. And then we're still looking into some of the reasons why some of our other folks have left. Some of that is then represented in the next table where we look at the change calculated by grade level. So this is looking at now first graders last year versus first graders this year, not the same cohort anymore, but just grade versus grade year over year, and what the change looks like there. So we do know that COVID, has played a role in families' decision-making around where they're electing to have their students enroll. We do see that choice numbers are down this year over the past year as well. And again, we're not entirely sure what the explanatory variable is behind choice students maybe tailing off a little bit, other than perhaps, again, COVID and folks making different choices, whether that's to be more close to home or looking at options that would allow maybe an online learning opportunity, which currently is not afforded in Massachusetts by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. So this kind of gives you a snapshot of what the enrollment figures look like, broken up in those different ways. I hope that this is a little bit more helpful in helping to make sense of the data. And if there's room for improvement in the model, we can certainly look at that in the future. But I know that especially Mr. Rimler had asked if we could, maybe show this in a slightly different fashion. So that's what we've endeavored to do.
I'm looking at Christine's black and white copy and realizing that my pretty colors that connect one grade to the next grade don't really show up in black and white.
No, but on the computer, they do nicely.
Yeah. So as you look across those steps, we did grade them in the same color, so it's easy to visually track moving down the staircase.
Does one of you want to share your screen?
I tried and it's not showing my file when I go to share screen, even though it says I can share screen, it's not, I'm getting a bunch of blank stuff. So I wasn't sure what that meant. So I've always been able to share before, but would just be blank stuff.
Let me see if I can share mine. If I'm talking first. Let me see if this will work on my end.
Was it easier? And my views are, I hope I can.
Yeah, because we're counting on it for later.
So, all right, it looks like
Okay, we got it.
the mine is working.
Yeah, well, Melissa just did. Or Dr. Goslin.
Yeah.
So we got it. I just wanted to comment that I did think the color coding made it, obviously if you printed it in black and white, not so easy, but I thought that made it good to compare year to, year across year. And the breakdown by resident choice, tuition, whatever, made this, work nicely.
And I'll have to offer one point of clarification. There are 2 additional students who are not represented in these numbers. We have 2 new students who elected to choice into Morris. So they'll be reflected in the next update, but they're not captured here yet since this went out on the 1st.
Yeah, this is the October 1
Yeah.
numbers that.
So we did have a little bit more space for a few more choice students, and we were asked if it made sense to accept a few more. So we did go to our wait lists and invite some of those students on the wait list to join us. And we did have two families take us up at the elementary level. We're not sure if the same thing will happen at the high school level. The ones we've reached out to have not responded affirmatively or negatively, but we're not sure if they'll want to join us because they have to wait now until the next term. And so that may not be as enviable to folks as joining at the beginning of the school year. Any questions around the attendance data?
Thanks for breaking it out. It's
Well, it's all Amy's magic, so don't thank me. She deserves all the credit. But
Thank you, Amy.
Yeah, it looks good.
I think it's a nice way to model it. And I thought it was a lot more easy for me to make sense for it visually as well. So thank you for the advice. So,
Oh, sorry, just two
Okay.
quick comments. I just wanted to note one thing that, just looking back from our strategic plan data, resident enrollment was 458 in 2014. So we're down 10 students over 7 or 8 years, which is, it's awfully stable. And driven pretty much entirely by the -6 in 9th grade this year. And likewise, we had a -5 in 9th grade last year. So it drives home the non-college pathways discussion, I guess, that we're starting to have. But I think in general, it is a quite stable picture as compared to 2009 to 2014 when we lost 150 kids by comparison.
Yeah, that's one of the strategic plan. We're tracking right about where we want to be, and it's a onesie-twosie game. You know, our sample size is so small, it really is very dependent on individual families' choices.
yeah, and some of the families that we've lost, we know the ones that chose to go to Taconic, but then other ones, the word that was given to the schools was, it was relocations for jobs and those kinds of things. So that's, I think, kind of a normal expectation in any school district. You have some small inflows and outflows, but no substantial evidence anyone saying we're voting with our feet and leaving. We haven't gotten that sense at all.
And then just the one other thing, because I've been fairly new for the strategic plan, I think we mentioned this at the last meeting, was to look at the DESI data for kids living in the town. And DESI reports we picked up 40 kids over the last 2 years. Essentially, I think probably mostly COVID, potentially temporary folks. So we don't see those coming into the school. We all of a sudden have 20 homeschoolers in town when we never had any. And a huge number who say they're still enrolled in public schools elsewhere, which I suspect is people who were virtually attending school in Brooklyn. So this January, we'll know a lot more if they're still here, but we may find there's actually another 25 to 40 kids who are suddenly in town and potentially gettable, so to speak. But,
This was the school attending children report.
yeah.
And I think that's a crucial point to make. And one of the things that we do hear from some of those families is they're not sure that they're going to stay, is what they say to us, right? And so one would think, well, if you're, on the fence, you save the tuition money. But I think as families, start to get acclimated and there's students make friends, that we do have a strong likelihood we'll pick them up. And certainly as they get the reputation of the school, and certainly we would love to invite them in to see what we do, take a tour and learn more about us. I think we need to be a little bit more outward facing in some of that outreach. And so, that's something that I'll work with the principals to make sure we do it. We did have one student reach out to us for a tour whose family had just moved in from, I believe it was Pittsfield. And she was thinking about choicing over to us, or what is coming to us, and rather than choicing back, I guess would be the correct terminology. But wanted a tour of the middle school or high school. So I was impressed by her initiative to have a teenager reach out to the superintendent and say, hey, can I get a tour of the schools? I mean, that was pretty cool. So that's the kind of kid I want. So I was really excited about that.
Anecdotally, I heard some stories of people that were concerned the district wouldn't be in person this year. So they were hedging their bets and hanging back a little bit. They were really looking for the in-person experience for their students.
Well, if they're listening, we're definitely in person. So you can reach out. We'll certainly give you a tour and help you get enrolled.
The people who are listening right now are mostly faculty. So,
What's next on the agenda?
yeah. So spread the word, faculty.
Sure. And speaking of faculty, our next item on the superintendent's report does pertain to faculty. So we've had a series of really productive meetings with the LEA. And I got to say, I'm just constantly amazed. I even said to Melissa before the meeting about how wonderful the working relationship is with our teachers union. And so, but we had very productive meetings looking at developing a memorandum of agreement, trying to outline working conditions that allow for a safe and healthy workplace for our faculty and staff and for our students to learn. And so we have signed a memorandum of agreement, and this is really on the agenda tonight just for the board to endorse. Just they don't have to approve it because it's already been signed by the president, or by the chair, sorry, who has the power to bargain on the board's behalf. But it would just be a nice, I think, show of support to get the endorsement of the committee.
Yeah, and we had three members of the LEA participating. We had Orrin Cass, myself, and Megan Kirby participating, as well as you and Alex Romalio, and it was a nice joint effort. And fortunately, it didn't end up being 24 meetings like it was last summer. It was 3 meetings or 3 or 4 meetings, whatever it was this year. And we came to a good, mutually acceptable agreement.
Yeah, and the major terms in the agreement are that masks will be worn indoors in shared spaces, except for drinking, of course, that staff will be required to submit their vaccination status. So we stopped short of a vaccine mandate, which some of our neighbors have done, because we had so many teachers that were already vaccinated. So to require the mandate was almost silly at that point. So we felt that at least showing the status was important to us, because DESE has allowed a potential off-ramp in the future if you can reach 80% vaccinated school community, including teachers and students. And so in order to reach that, we need to know who indeed is vaccinated. So this gives us the opportunity to collect that data from our staff. And also all staff still are required to participate in the routine COVID safety check program, which again has been clipping along very smoothly, given the amount of folks that participate. So again, I think we're doing a nice job all the way around, and we've had no COVID cases over the last 2 pool testing rounds, or outside of that from anybody in the community who's tested positive in a rapid test or had an exposure outside of school. So suffice to say, it seems that, at least from a data gathering exercise, that our COVID mitigation strategies are working to find out if we have any cases, who they are, and also trying to keep kids and faculty safe by some of the other preventative measures. So, but that's really, and the other, I guess, key piece for the MOA is that there will be no exceptions to the policy. So sometimes we'll see exceptions for medical or for religious reasons, and both sides agree that there would be no exceptions for this policy. So that's the MOA that was recently signed.
What's the term of that?
Through the end of the school year. Is that what you meant?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the next item on the superintendent's report is a suggested policy for the board to consider, which would basically mimic the MOA that was signed with our bargaining unit folks that would apply to all of our staff who are not represented by those bargaining units. And again, the terms are virtually the same, requiring all employees to wear masks, requiring all employees to submit a COVID-19 vaccination status to us. Again, it doesn't require that they're vaccinated, but we do need to know their status so that we can calculate that 80%. Continued participation in the COVID safety checks, which was already previously adopted by the committee. No exceptions from reporting the vaccination status or participating in the COVID safety check program. That would be a difference from earlier policy where there was a exception for religious or medical purposes. However, folks who helped to frame that felt that that really was not representative of what the intention was, and that it kind of slipped in, I think, with some of the draft language that was supplied by the Massachusetts Association of School Committees. Any employee who has to quarantine due to a positive test, but is well enough to work, would still be allowed to work without using any of their leave benefits. And employees would also be asked to participate in remote meetings if they were required from home via the internet or telephone. So again, if we're just asking if they can still teach, that they still be available for those other potential meetings, whether those are faculty meetings or parent-teacher conferences or those types of things. And then pursuant to the guidelines that I mentioned earlier from DESE, that if any of our schools reach 80% total vaccination, that includes staff and students in the school community, that the Joint Labor Management Committee will relieve that school community of their masking requirement, but those who are unvaccinated would still be required to remain masked. So again, we're trying to incentivize folks to get vaccinated, but if folks choose not to, they would still need to remain masked for the safety of themselves and others. And then the rest of the policy just says that if they're absent, they can continue working until the next weekly COVID testing. But if someone was to always be absent, then we would look at that as a pattern, and we would have to deal with that as we would any other violation of workplace policy. And then finally, this new policy would supersede the previous employment mitigation strategy policy for the remainder of the school year.
So I guess I'll accept a motion to approve this policy.
I'll move that we approve the COVID-19 mitigation policy for LPS employees.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. My only discussion was at the very bottom line. I think you need to take the word until out. It's until through.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I think we cut and pasted, sorry.
Okay, yeah. Yeah,
I got a quick question.
Yep.
DESE is requiring the approval of an attestation form.
Yes.
Does that then come under pursuant to the guidelines in the last bullet point? So that would be considered under that.
Yes. So yeah, right. Once we reach the 80%, then I have to formally attest, or swear to DESE that we have indeed reached that, and that they have my word that that's accurate. So that would be the mechanism. So once we have that, then the procedure is then I submit that attestation form.
Do they approve that, or does it just submitted? Do we know?
So I don't think that, I think submission means that it's automatically approved. It's really you giving your, sworn statement that what you're submitting to them is accurate.
Mhm.
So I don't foresee them trying to go and vet all 351 submissions, but really trusting that if you're saying that the data's accurate, that it is. Until someone would challenge you and say, I think you're lying, but,
Right.
Show me the numbers.
yeah.
Mark, I know there was a discussion about how to set up for faculty the submission of, is that working smoothly with a?
It is working, I think, better than any of us could have imagined. So what we did is we put together a Google form, and it just asks folks to give us their name, where they work, if they've been vaccinated or not, and then if they have been, to upload a picture of their vaccine card. And that gets submitted to a folder that only I have access to. So it's highly secure, and it works great. It's been easy and convenient. I think when I pushed out the form, I already had 20 some odd submissions, maybe in the first minute alone. So, people felt that it worked pretty well for them. And if people, for some reason, felt that they didn't want to submit it that way, they could always give us a paper copy. But, and we've tried to have this conversation with the LEA as recently even as this afternoon, that there's something about paper that sometimes we feel is more secure, but right now is a good example. There's lots of paper sitting out here that, someone could conceivably see paper that's on top of desks or this kind of thing, or if someone's hand delivering it, they could open it, right? So in a lot of ways, we're trying to say, the submission through Google is the most secure way. It's an encrypted program, and they have some of the best security experts in the world working on these things, 24/7. So that's probably the best way if you're concerned with data privacy to submit that way. And then, there's always a potential for breach, obviously, but if there was, that's kind of up here and it's a whole different thing as opposed to a breach locally where someone could say, oh, well, I happen to see orange thing. I guess that, so I think that, having the paper and being hyper local probably is more potentially damaging than a submission electronically.
And so just thinking about the 80% metric, would you want to use the same system to start gathering student info, particularly at the middle high school, or what? I guess any thoughts about timeline for that, and then it's the same infrastructure.
So I think we'll have a conversation around how to collect the student data. We know the system works very well. So if the school committee believes that that's a good approach, we would be happy to do the same thing to collect student data. Student data collection has been kind of the third rail for a little bit of the COVID discussion, right? But I think we're at a point now, especially when we have to count the 80%, we need to know that information. So it's impossible that we get to 80% if we can't get those student numbers. The only other way to do it is there is a database of all vaccinated individuals, and we could go through the back end of that, but that's a pretty arduous task. It would take a lot of extra effort from our nurses to sift through and try to clean all this data. And so I think that if we can use the same submission protocol, that would probably be a better mechanism to collect that information.
And would you want some sort of policy from the school committee on that, or is that something you feel like the administration can move as it wants with?
So I really think it could go either way. I mean, if the school committee is comfortable saying that that's an administrative issue and you guys can do that, we're happy to do that. If it's something that you do want to say, we want to say in this, we really want to show our support for this, or we want to, go through the process of maybe having a discussion around this, before we rush into this, that's fine too. But we're prepared either way, I think, to move forward. And I think, again, I'm just thinking aloud, but I think that parents would be likely to look favorably upon the idea that, if we can get that 80%, that there might be the opportunity to relax, like the mask mandate and that kind of thing. Families might also feel the opposite. So that might be the only other, potential issue that we might want to consider as we move ahead.
Implementation for the percentage that are not vaccinated. In-school implementation of mask versus unmasked students.
So can you repeat that again?
So you'll have, you may have, let's hope everyone's, you'll have a group of students who are vaccinated. You'll have a group of students who are unvaccinated who will have to be masked.
Right.
So there would be some procedure to implement, in that case for the day-to-day operations in school for masked.
Right. And that would be, I think, one thing that would be somewhat of a burden for teachers and for administration to know who is under what status, right? And we're not going to make kids, walk around with like a scarlet letter. But, at the same time, we will have to have, some kind of list and a way of, I think, sharing that information in a way that's sensitive to student privacy, or coming up with some kind of system so that we know, that people aren't abusing that. But and a lot of this also hinges on when the new regulations will come out surrounding vaccines for students under 12. And that would be a huge, I think, lift, especially at our kind of hybrid middle high school environment at LMHS, so that we don't have that kind of divide, amongst the body. But again, right now, just some numbers that our nurse was able to pull between voluntary information and looking at some of those databases. We're hovering in around like the mid 70s in terms of numbers of students that are vaccinated. So
Even including the sixth grade, the fact that most of them haven't turned?
no, this is all the students who are eligible.
Oh, okay, okay.
And so some of those sixth graders may be.
Right, okay.
Depending on, what month they're born, but, so, there's a likelihood that we theoretically get there at LMHS, so.
Yeah, that's a pretty good number at this point.
Right. And we
It seems to
consider
me anyway.
Teachers, I think we're at like 98 or 99%, so.
I noticed that our owl is not moving around and doing what it's supposed to do, and that might be a setting that you need to
I
do.
think it's actually on the owl itself, like the manual button you have to push.
Well, isn't that the one I pushed, or is that something else?
I don't know, I can.
Yeah, that's okay. I can move my computer around so that people at home can see the people speaking, but I didn't start that until just a moment or two ago.
Sure.
You go ahead with, I guess we're going to have Melissa's presentation soon. Oh, we have to vote.
Yeah,
Any more discussion on this policy? Hearing none, we'll do a roll call vote. Megan Kirby,
Aye.
Christine Morrow,
Aye.
Bob Vaughn, aye.
David Rimler, aye.
Much aye.
Lauren Cap. Okay.
Can I swap to that table there?
You may.
Sure.
I think it'll be easier.
All right, and so for the next item in the superintendent's report, I've asked Melissa Falkowski, our assistant superintendent for business and operations, to share with the community and with the committee just a brief overview of school revenues from state and federal sources, but more particularly some of the unique grants that we have received due to COVID, what those are, what they mean, what the amounts are, and what the plans are with those monies. I feel that it would help promote transparency and help demystify some of the grants that have been out there that we've been reading about or hearing about concerning COVID. So Melissa's been gracious enough to put together a short presentation that I think is easy to understand, and I promise won't be boring.
You can promise that, huh?
Yes.
Okay. Have my microphone on, I hope. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Oh, you can, yes. All right, so
Oh,
the one's not on, yeah.
we'll get that working.
Megan, can you hear me?
All right.
She says yes? Okay, good. So as Dr. Goslin talked about, we are going to give you an overview of the grant funding that the district receives. A lot of these grants are entitlement grants, and we receive them every year. For the most part, the monetary value remains about the same. So I'll go through all of those. And then we'll end with the special funding for relief, coronavirus relief. So for federal and state funding, we receive Title I, 2A, 3, and 4. We receive IDA funds, which are for special education purposes. We also receive early education funds, Perkins for career and technology. The state aid is the Chapter 70 formula, which is based upon a 59% local contribution and a 41% state aid contribution. And there's other factors involved, and we can get into that more at budget time. It's a very complicated formula. But basically, it's the amount of state aid that the town receives to help educate the students that live in the town, that are of the foundation enrollment. Circuit breaker, we receive that. It's a special education reimbursement. This year, we will be receiving $51,259, and that will go to offset special education expenditures in the FY23 budget. That's a 3-year cycle. You claim, you receive, and then you spend. So any funds we receive this year will be used in next year's budget.
I think one thing of note on this particular slide too is to see the overall amount of federal funding that we do get is pretty low overall, right? And so there's a lot of regulation from the federal government. However, in most school districts, it makes up a very small overall portion of the school district funding.
Yes.
Lots of unfunded mandates that we see from the federal government.
Yes. Yes. And in fact, if you're under 750,000, that's the level that you're considered to be receiving a high amount where you should be audited. But under that year, it's considered a very small amount, which this is. So we'll go through each of the funds and give you the purpose, what Lenox, the school district, uses it for, and the status of the grant. Title I is, Title I is to ensure that all children meet the rigorous state academic standards. And this is used at the elementary level, and Lenox allocates it towards Title I paraprofessional salaries. That's interventionists. They help with students that require more services. We have a Title I teacher. A good portion of the allocation goes to the private schools within our district, though. So even though we receive 174, 52,000 of it goes elsewhere. So the net that Lenox actually gets is about 122. The majority of the funds go to Hillcrest Educational for their negligent and delinquent program. So that is, and that's something that is non-negotiable. The state sets those rates. We are just a custodial of the funds for Hillcrest. Title 2A is a professional development funding. So it's used to supplement our resources, to support our teachers, and the learning environment in the schools for our staff. And that's about $23,000, and we use it entirely for professional development. Title 4 is to support high-quality educational experience, which really is, if you think about that, it could be curriculum enrichment. You can purchase supplies, services. You can pay stipends to develop a curriculum if you do one. And Lenox receives $10,000 there. And all of these grants on this page have been submitted in August, accepted, and the funds are being received now. IDEA is the special ed grant, and that is a larger grant, and its use is to ensure students with disabilities receive free and appropriate education and to support the district in achieving that for those students. That amount is $251,085. In Lenox, here in Lenox, we use it for medical and therapeutic services for our students, out-of-district transportation for students who are attending other programs, and tuition to those programs as well, and in-district supplies for our students. Another special education grant is the 262. It's a much smaller grant, and it's for early education, pre-K and K. And again, it's to ensure that students in that age group receive a free and appropriate education, and it supports our district in ensuring that we can meet our students' unique needs. What we use it for is professional development for the pre-K staff, and we also purchase instructional and assessment materials. This one also is completed and accepted. Title III is another grant that is to support English learners. And we receive a small portion. We are not the custodian of these funds. We are part of a consortium. So another district, the collaborative, does all the work for us, reimburses us for the expenses that we have for some of this. And the average amount that we've received is about $2,000. That grant is not completed. It's usually done by November. And then we can start submitting our invoices to be reimbursed. The Perkins grant is a vocational grant, and it's to develop technical and employability skills of students. We receive a small dollar amount of $5,621. And because of this, and because we have 9 students attending DeConic, Pittsfield Public Schools, we ship that money directly to Pittsfield Public Schools. We don't take it in. We don't have the program yet. We may be able to utilize it when the Pathways gets up and running, but right now we don't. So we send it to, they call it Schedule A. We sign off, send it to Pittsfield, and so they use that for their students, of which 9 are from Lenox. Chapter 70, as I said, is a state aid, and the town of Lenox receives $1,287,000, and that is only the minimum aid increase of $30 per student. There are 16 districts in the Commonwealth that, if they did not receive this minimum aid, would actually see a decrease. So this is a hold harmless situation where the state does not want to give us a decrease in the aid, so they give us a minimum increase per student.
How many districts did you say?
16.
16, only 16.
It used to be a lot higher, yeah.
Surprising.
And then the other portion of that formula is the minimum local contribution. This is the minimum amount that the town of Lenox has to spend from their own funds to educate the children in their town, which is the foundation enrollment kids. And that's $4.7 million. And the town, the Chapter 70 goes directly to the town. School district doesn't see it. It goes onto their books, and they receive that monthly.
All prior to this, Chapter 70, were those all federal prior to Chapter 70?
Yes, these are all.
Title one's the idea of specialty K.
All federal grants, yes. And they're coordinated through the state. So the state gets the money from the federal government. We apply for the funding through the state's website. We ask for, every month we can go in and ask for funding if we've expended it. So it's a whole process, but it is federal money that we are accessing through the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Circuit breaker this is state funding that we receive 75% reimbursement of costs that are 4 times the foundation budget per pupil. The foundation budget per pupil is, I won't have the exact number, but it's somewhere in the 40,000. It's probably about 45 or 46,000 now. So any expenses that we have that are over the 4 times that amount, 250, 260, we can apply for reimbursement, and we will receive 75% of it. And it adds additional funding in the form of a reimbursement to help with these costs. Sometimes the percentage is 60%. It just depends on how much funding the state has. And this year is the first year that transportation has been eligible for reimbursement. So we did receive more funding this year because of that. And because that the transportation is in the reimbursement formula now, the percentage is a bit higher than it has been in past years, so it's at 75%. And the school district receives these funds, and we receive them quarterly. So those are the traditional or expected grants every year. We have received more grants because of the pandemic, because of the acts that have been signed to help with emergency relief due to the pandemic. And the 3 main grants are the ESSER grants, ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3. ESSER 1 and 2 were both signed in March of 2020, and ESSER 3 was available to us August 21st. And that's the American Rescue Plan, and I think that was signed in April of this year. So the dates of each grant, the first 2, ESSER 1 and ESSER 2, were accessible. The funding was accessible beginning March 2020. ESSER 1 has to be expended by September 2022, and that was about $94,000. ESSER 2 was just under $400,000. That has to be expended by September 2023. And then the ESSER 3 grant is one that is available this year. We've applied for it, and that has to be extended by September of 2024. These dates may change. They have changed since the money has been available to the schools. So it may even go out further, but 2024 is the last date at this point that these funds can be spent. So the first fund, the ESSER 1, was for coronavirus aid right at the beginning of the pandemic. And it was emergency funds to address whatever was necessary. There's not a lot of
Like strings attached.
strings attached, thank you. You really can use this funding for whatever it is that you need to continue to deliver education.
Which is virtually unprecedented
Yes.
in terms of federal funding to
Yes.
have that kind of flexibility.
So as I said, we received $94,000, and what we use that for, there is still a little bit, there's $35,000 remaining, but during the course of last year, as we went from remote to hybrid to remote to hybrid to in-person, everything was in flux, and there was more personnel needed to be able to cover classrooms, to be able to cover absences. So a lot of this money was used for additional temporary positions, technology devices, so that when we were remote, our teachers and our students would be able to access the platforms that they needed to be able to learn and to teach. And also we used it for summer programming in that first summer after the pandemic began, and that was a very small program. So that has been completed, accepted, and we have $35,000 remaining. ESSER 2 is the same sort of grant, different act that gave us the money, but it was to safely reopen schools in September of last year, 20, and address learning loss and student mental health services. So again, we use this funding for salaries of additional temporary positions, technology devices, and some medical equipment that we had to adjust the way that we were testing students for hearing and seeing. We had to get something that was a little bit less, it's a different machine where there was more social distancing. So we purchased that as well, and we have this money, we draw down from this fund, and there's about 177 remaining in that to be used for the next 2 years. ESSER 3 is the third of the emergency funding. That was the plan that President Biden signed in April, the American Rescue Plan, and it's for, again, the safe reopening of schools this year. And it was also to address, it's also to address learning loss, mitigation strategies and things of that nature, mental health services. That grant is in process. We have submitted to the state and are just waiting for any questions if they require clarification or approval. And that's a large grant, that's $893,000. That is available to the district until 2024 at this point.
And that one does come with more strings than ESSER 1 or 2.
Yes, and I have a slide on that at the end. So ESSER 3, this is what we intend to use this for. And again, this could change as our needs change. But the way that we submitted this was the estimated dollars to address learning loss, technology, professional development, and some operations that we needed, maintenance and operations of our buildings. So we've got about 168 towards after school and summer, 168,000 after school and summer enrichment offerings, textbooks. We will need to continue to purchase technology devices. We have to get into a renewal cycle. We have older laptops, we have older devices. What we did with the initial funding was buy devices to close the gap, but those older devices are still in use and we need to replace them. And through a renewal cycle. So we have set aside $140,000 for that. Now this is over 3 years. It won't all take place in 1 year, but that'll give us a 3-year cycle and get us into a good position to keep a level budget item each year where you don't see spikes. You know, if we are replacing every year 50 units, that cost will remain relatively stable in the budget. You don't want to 1 year replace 10, the next year have to replace 100. And that's where you see a lot of the variances in budgets, where if we can get into this cycle, it will be fairly level as we move to operating funds. We also will be using a portion of the grant for professional development, for social emotional learning and diversity and equity training. That's about $50,000 estimated at this point. And then for operations, we are looking to add utility substitutes. People that are in the building every day that can be utilized where they are needed on that particular day. We talked a little bit about that at the last school committee meeting. But this money and this funding will allow us, while this is going on, and we have people out periodically, we will have bodies there we can put into classrooms, or when there's pool testing going on, utilize them to help. So it will help with the daily operations in the 2 school buildings.
Just to go back to utility substitutes for a minute. So we are not using them right now pending accepting this grant. We're not looking for them right now.
No, we do need some. We have money set aside in the operating budget for substitutes at both schools. This will give us additional funding to have more in the building.
Would the plan then be that after the grant term is up, that we would try to continue then and look for other sources of funding to cover, or we would just continue?
I think that the 3 positions should be hired with grant availability of the funds. If there is a need to keep them later and move them to operating, we'll have to look at that, talk with the principals and see what is a give and take to keep them there. But at this point, I think it should stick with the length of the grant.
But the amount you're talking about here the 150,000, would that be a 1-year cost for 3 people?
No,
Okay,
no, that's over the length of the grant.
okay.
That was my question too, it's over 3 years then. So we can get 3 full-time substitutes for $50,000?
That's what I was wondering too.
They work about 6.5 hours a day, and typically it would be a paraprofessional substitute. So 15 to 20,000 over the course of the school year. They would not need to be in the building when students aren't there, when it's not a school day, so that does decrease the cost a bit.
Mhm.
And then, of course, continued HVAC improvements. Mark and I, Dr. Goslin and I have had a lot of conversations about what to do with some of the buildings, and we do have some ideas, and this is really a placeholder for any continued work that needs to be done at either of our buildings as it pertains to air quality. And HVAC.
Question from me. Is there any opportunity to look at the money we're allocating to supplies, potentially reduce that? Not sure what the requirements are, but there was a tremendous push towards disinfecting, which has not been substantiated by what we actually understand of transmission modes. And so I'm not sure if we could ease off of that, some of the over cleaning and over disinfecting that was happening.
Yeah.
They still do that.
It is still happening to a degree. We do have a supply. And this, again, is over a 3-year period, so it's only about $12,000 a year. 12.5. I'm doing it right in my head, but it's not a ton of money. You can purchase wipes, and for both schools, for the number of staff and students, it's about $8,000 turn. Now, if the town has been very gracious and they have CARES money, so when they have funding, we sort of piggyback on theirs. If they have excess, we use some of theirs as well. But every one of these grants are amendable. So if that's in there and we determine that we don't want to spend it on that, we can amend the grant and move it into a different area.
Just one last comment on disinfection. Would there be take the opportunity to look at general attendance as relates to increased disinfection? In other words, sick days for students, prior COVID to COVID, now that there's greater disinfection. Does that fall into any purview? Follow what I'm saying?
I think I do.
Flu, strep, colds, you're increasing disinfection. Are we just going to see sort of an unexpected effect to general student absenteeism due to colds, and as I said, colds, flu, whatever?
I think it's too early to tell, but initial indications say likely not, right? That we're not going to see a substantial decrease in absenteeism because of all this new surface cleaning. So we have an uptick in absences actually at Morris around some of the viruses and illnesses that you mentioned. So strep is going around, RSV is going around. We'll still always have, rhinoviruses and noroviruses, and there are already confirmed cases of the flu in our area, not in our schools yet, but, so those are still things where we need to remain vigilant, and wash hands and get the flu vaccine. But maybe one of the things we learned from COVID is that maybe we're historically have emphasized fomite sanitation, surface sanitation. Maybe it's not as important as or as we think. But I mean, we do have experts on the committee that could probably speak, more informed than I am on a topic. But I just know that we are already seeing a sharp uptick in absences just this week alone at Morris. So I mean, anything's likely, but I think we have to really be also very concerned as a community about the flu. For 2 decades, I've been in pandemic flu trainings almost every year because everyone thought that was the pandemic that we were gonna have. No one ever saw this one coming, right? But the likelihood still remains that if we, become complacent in regards to the flu, that could easily be the next, nightmare coming down the pike. So I think we want to make sure that we're messaging, to take steps to avoid, the flu, just to, same way we do some of these other things, but,
To that point, if I'm recalling correctly, Jesse did have a flu vaccine requirement last school year.
That's getting a big political flop, I think.
Okay, we talked about it. So my question was around this year. I haven't heard anything around.
I haven't yet either. And I'm hopeful that there will be one. If not, I think at least, as we've learned before, I think we're better not waiting on that side and if we locally, studying about that, even if it's just an education, campaign first and foremost. But I think that I am concerned with the flu and the fact that they're already starting to see cases, especially when everybody's wearing masks and, trying to take other precautionary measures.
Melissa, do you apply for 3 year or you do 1 3-year application? And that's it?
1 3-year application. The only time that you need to, and it's not even reapplying, you just have to move the money around. It's called the amendment process. So, and you have to explain what you're doing, where it's coming from, and where it's going. And typically that's a very quick process.
And they release money quarterly or?
No, monthly, they open up the drawdown window at the end of each month. So what I typically do is look to see what's expended, what we anticipate to expend in the next month, and what we've received. And so it's basic math formula, what you've received, what you've expended, what's the balance. They only allow you to draw down your deficit in receipt and expenditures plus what you anticipate in the next month. That's it. So it's a monthly process for all of these.
I have some concerns about the 2-year window and spreading it out. I know we're allowed to, but we don't have to, right?
No, we do not have to.
And it just feels like we're putting a lot of things in here that do create cliffs at the end of 3 years. So the technology renewal cycle, we will have just as much a renewal cycle need the following year. And so that's one. The permanent utility subs, we talked about wanting to have this year because we were worried about COVID absences and quarantines. But if we have them for 3 years and it gets to be the end of 2024, I don't see any prospect of us not having completely incorporated them into our day-to-day operations. And so I guess I'm wondering to what extent can we either spend this money sooner in the one-time way it's intended, and or it seems like there's not, I see the maintenance of equity requirement, but there's not much of a maintenance of effort requirement. So if we spent half of it this year and essentially gave half of it back to the town, we could do that.
This funding would not go to the town. It's not part of the operating budget. If we don't spend it, it goes back.
So I'm sorry, but if we take things that we were going to spend on anyway and spend this money on it, we could give the money back to the town.
Yes, and one part of the budget process last year, that's exactly what occurred. We are using 136,000 of the ESSER 2 funding to offset the operating budget. So if we don't, if we use that and not use the operating budget as much, although this is part of the bottom line, the money that we can give back to the town could be greater, but the permanent subs that you're talking about are not in the budget this year. So if they go into the budget next year and we don't have to spend it the way it's written, this is the initial request where we think we need things. This will change. And even with some of the regular grants, the Title I grant that can go for 2 years, we amend that grant too. Because we use it for what we intended the first year, and then we say, okay, let's reassess and see where we need to put it, and we amend and then continue on.
What's the, Greg, you're chasing your own. What's the benefit to the school district to accelerating expenditures?
Oh, I think there are two. One is making sure that we don't program things into business as usual. So if we had some one-time expense that we knew was gonna land in 2023, that would be fine. But the things that we're planning to spend over 3 years here aren't one-time things. They're things we're baking into the budget and will become standard operating procedures. So that's one concern of mine. The other thing, sorry, just to follow on that, because it was getting my other question, when we used the 136K of ESSER 2 for this year's budget, in the operating budget, that was essentially for regular operating expenses, right?
They were for operating expenses that already existed, that in order to reduce the level of the budget
Right.
for local funding, we applied or offset with.
So I guess my concern is we already have 136K cliff coming at the end of this year, because to hit this year's budget, we used 136K that was one time, essentially. And so I don't know, I'm concerned. And then I'm also, sorry, my last question is just, to what extent are some of these connected to COVID? And I guess that would particularly be the professional development items. Is this just, is there something that has happened because of COVID that led us to feel like we need to spend this? Or is this just, we have the money and this is something to use it for?
Mark, you could probably answer better, but I do think that it is something that we need to spend for mental health services for the students and staff as well, and to improve the culture of the schools, the climate of the schools, the well-being of everyone in the school mentally. I think that professional development will help the staff greatly. I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, I agree. And I think that, again, the two things we put together in terms of promoting overall wellness, which we know, I mean, I can't open any sort of educational magazine, journal, publication without reading something about the needs of social emotional learning, right? And so we know that that's an impact. And then we also hear it, locally from parents and students themselves saying that, COVID has definitely caused them some anxiety and things of that nature. So, and some of it comes under more of a traditional, what we would call the SEL umbrella, but then there's other factors that then are layered in under, whether yours particular race and you feel that you've been disproportionately impacted that way. We have folks who also are very concerned with special needs students and their ability to access the space, especially students on the spectrum. And so that's where, I think the inclusiveness of the DEI training would also be, it's not just straight race, but it's also thinking about disabilities as well, and how to support successful reintegration and doing school again the way we used to, because that's been disrupted by COVID too. And so I think we need to gain some lost ground, I think, in the way that we try to make all students welcome in schools. We're very concerned about cliffs, and I think one of the things that we've tried to be very strategic around is not hiring any new employees or new staff with this, Other districts around us have done that, and I think that that is a major problem if you start propping yourself up on the HR side with these kinds of funds. There will be legacy costs that will definitely come back to bite you. So, we try to intentionally stay away from that. When you look across the country, most people are using it, I think, in three big areas, and that's the social emotional learning piece, technology, and air conditioning. Many leaders are looking at this and saying, hey, we've been wanting to do an air conditioning project forever. We can never get a referendum passed. So here's our one shot of, this money to do this, which would certainly help us with air quality, but also, something that we want to do for a while and never get around to. So again, we've been trying to look at that too. Now, if we want to reallocate dollars, and we say in our case, that HVAC is important to us, we could shift some funds there and say, let's, go big on, on air conditioning. So there is those opportunities to make those amendments. We're trying to also look at some other systems out there that might give us some more flexible solutions for indoor air quality and indoor comfort as well. And we know that there is some research out there that does show that for every 1 degree of cooling that you bring into a building, that scores improve and kids do better at school. So there is some evidence that might be a worthwhile goal to look at. But we don't want to also get into this boondoggle where we're spending millions of dollars on an HVAC system either. So we're trying to really, I think, be strategic here. We had to park the money somewhere to start with. We can always go back and redraw the boundaries if our needs change or if our priorities change.
And so is this HVAC amount for air conditioning, or that's everything short of air conditioning?
So again, it's mostly going to be looking at probably, if it's feasible and if we can do it, air conditioning and air filtration. Right? So I think those two things will help improve the air quality. And some of our schools get pretty warm at certain parts of the season. So again, we want to be sensitive to that. And that's, if you look at, especially the high school and the historical student works, whether those are student newspapers or student literary magazines, it's amazing how much ink has been dedicated to complaining about the heat in the building. So this is not a new thing by any stretch. This is something that I saw even before I joined the district, that students have been complaining about this for years. And so it gives us an opportunity to maybe look at that. Again, will we be able to do something that's substantial? Maybe, or maybe not, I'm not sure. So, but we want to start to, now that we have the ability to look at this maybe in a real way, start to get some prices on something like maybe like, the Mitsubishi mini split system, a series of those. At the top, because some other districts have done that. They say, for the cost, it's a pretty good solution. It's pretty flexible. And then if something changes, like you do in addition to the building, you can uninstall them and move them. So we can take them potentially from like LMHS, bring over to Morris if, we have some sort of change in the future. So, we're curious to see what we would need and what it would cost in our context. It could just all be a pipe dream, but I think it's worth at least doing the exercise and trying to get some bids and seeing what it might cost.
Yeah,
If I have a Mitsubishi mini split, I
we had some email communications from some faculty last year when it got really hot in the beginning of June, and I know Bob responded and to the teacher or teacher's concerns that we would do what we could to make the learning environment appropriately cool as best we could. And I asked Mark and Melissa to look into the possibility of room air conditioners. Obviously, we can't put a whole system in for the whole building, but we might be able to do something room by room where it was most critical, and so. But I do echo, Lauren, your concerns about money that we were taking from the operating budget, using ESSER funds for stuff that will at some point show up in the operating budget again. And that's always a concern. We had to meet a number last year, and this was a way that, we could make it happen because we had these funds. But again, you're kind of delaying the inevitable increase that will at some point take place in the budget when the money goes back in. And it's something that we all
Yes.
know about, we're all,
That would-
concerned about.
That would be horrific if, when these funds are over, our budget shoots up. I don't foresee that happening because I know you're concerned about technology. That can be built in slowly. It won't be a big jump. We do have a new tech director, so we'll get that in line. And I think that we can use this money to the district's benefit and not see that cliff. And I think the biggest cliff you'll see is if you use it for personnel.
I think-
Which we're sort of doing. I guess I'm.
You're temporary for the length of the grant.
Yeah. I guess my just last thought on this is we're obviously soon going to head into budget season, and I think we should hold ourselves a goal of writing a 2022, 2023 budget that does not use ESSER funds. If we have ESSER funds below the line for HVAC stuff and so forth, that's fine, but I think we should hold ourselves accountable for not putting next year's tech renewal, the subs, if we're still want them next year. That should all balance without ESSER. And if it doesn't, I at least will be very concerned. So that's just why we're here.
I agree.
Yeah, I think we want to do something, we want to just reserve this as maybe like, an extra batch of icing, but we don't want to, say that we need that in order to bake the cake for next year. So I think we, do want to make sure that we're not getting caught up in that. And that's what we've, I think, tried to the best of our ability, say like, let's use these for those one-shot injection kind of things, but we don't want to take the legacy costs. And so, the technology cycle, as we're seeing it, maybe we're not articulating it as clear as we can. We're not looking at this as being some new legacy cost. Like, we'll always have technology costs anyway, but we looked at this as a opportunity to do an initial refreshment of the Chromebooks, and then once it's up and running, now you take one grade level up and do a 1 year, so that's a much smaller lift. But we're not saying that, we're gonna keep relying on this, but.
Yeah, and we've always had a certain amount of money in our capital budget for the technology. I don't know what order of magnitude we're talking. And the last 3 years, we haven't been able to use any of that for this, so.
All set?
Yep. Any more slides?
I agree with you. I don't want to balance the folks using.
So the ESSER 3 money, the larger grants require more. And so we have to do a few things in order to be able to receive the money. So we have to file our in-person return plans, so they have to be posted on our website 30 days after receipt of the grant. Maintenance of equity provision to ensure resources are meeting the needs of all students. And really what maintenance of equity is you're not replacing local funding with this. You have to still maintain this local funding. Capital expenditures of $30,000 or more must be pre-approved. 20% must be expended to address learning loss. And we were not required to provide any equitable services funding to the private schools in the area. They receive their own ESSER 3. Besides the 3 ESSER grants, there was other grants that we received as well. The Coronavirus Relief Fund, the CVRF, that was 2019, 2020, 2021 school year. And that was for $114,975, and we used that for technology, Canvas facilitators. These were people that would be able to help anyone that had problems with the learning platform, the Chromebooks, the laptops.
Kind of site coordinators, somebody at Morris and somebody at the high school, or
Yes.
maybe more than one.
Yes. And the Chromebooks were purchased, as well as the second grant listed there for $16,915. Those devices were purchased, piggybacked with a state purchase. So those funds never actually arrived. A good portion of the first grant and all of the second grant, they just went straight to the state. We received the devices, they received the funding. In addition, there's a lot of smaller fund buckets that get sent to us, and we don't know that they're coming. We may get, a quick email, or in a meeting, someone from the state will say, oh, by the way, you're going to receive $1,416 for your food service program. Just apply it to any expenditures you have.
So that means we don't apply for them, they're just distributed.
The bottom two were just distributed, the top two were applied for. And the 24/6, and that's where we had the tents outside at the middle high school last year. We had 3 tents for teachers and students, and that 24/6 paid for those tents, and that was unexpected money as well. We received it in April, and by the end of June, it was expended on the tents. So all of these are done and over with and fully expended. This year, we're receiving 2 other grants as well, due to the Rescue Plan Act. And I didn't put a purchase on the special ed one, but it is for exactly what we're using it for. Special ed expenditures, out-of-district tuition, out-of-district transportation. And that application has been completed. Not approved yet, but completed, and it should be approved. Typically, it takes anywhere from 7 to 10 days before we get our approval letter. The second grant is professional development for early education. That's pre-K and K again, and our Director of Student Services wants to use it for instructional materials, assessment materials, and instructional and development student engagement activities. And both of those grants are completed. We should receive approval, I would assume, in a week, maybe 2. Any questions or comments?
Any more questions? Thank you for the very detailed and comprehensive.
You're welcome.
We don't always know, particularly on all the stuff that came with COVID. I mean, so that's good.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'm going to move down to subcommittees now. We had a governance and leadership meeting. If you want to just give a brief.
Yes, so we had our first governance and leadership subcommittee meeting since January 2020. That was exciting. We talked about, so we got a subcommittee member with us, and also Mark. The first time we talked about what we had worked on in past years, and then talked about our focus areas for this year, which will include aligning with the strategic plan leadership section. There is a concept advanced in there around leadership councils to be established in each of our buildings that we can work towards. Also discussed, and this is an item that had been raised previously, but not pursued because of the pandemic, MASC policy review services, which is where we would contract with MASC to actually do a comprehensive review and update of our current policy book with cooperation from all the subcommittees who also are participating with the MASC staff. So this is something we had talked about. I think we were in the process of talking about it last time we met. It must have been January 2020, and we're supportive of, but then just break on. So,
I believe we actually approved it as a committee.
Okay.
And then it just, with COVID, we held off,
Right, so we held up, but it's, the need has not, the need is unchanged. So.
Sounds like a good ESSER grant one.
Yeah.
Time, no quiz.
So, I'm reaching out to MASC, to our field representatives to see if anything has changed around contract, cost and commitment, and, we'll bring that information back to the subcommittee and then to the full committee, and we can, I think we'll need to vote again, to move forward with that. Third item raised was around standard operating procedures, and we've heard from Mark that he's identified some places where we could have a lot more standardization in how we do some of our things, maybe some of our hiring practices, which aren't always doing it the same way, so that it could be something we can put some focus into this year. And finally, last topic, profile of a graduate. This would involve the committee inputting and creating a portrait of the qualities that a successful graduate would embody. I know there was another call on this, which I didn't attend, but this can be like a school year long project that the subcommittee can take the reins on and then bring back to the full committee.
All righty. Human Resources has been meeting fairly regularly. We met with the LEA regarding the memorandum of agreement. And we'll be having an initial meeting with the LEA next week to begin discussions about negotiations.
We also.
And that's been, Oren and Megan and me, and it was you and Megan and me for governance and leadership. Has there been a teaching and learning one yet? And how about school culture?
We're getting there.
And school culture?
Teaching and learning is relevant too.
Okay, and finance subcommittee, we had a meeting, our first meeting in a while. And I think since maybe last December. And this was Christine and me and Oren. And Christine, Oren, and I, actually. And we met with members of the town finance committee. Mark was there too. And essentially the town finance committee, wished to share some stuff with us regarding how they'd like us to do our budgeting process. They'd like us to do zero-based personnel, look at personnel, yeah, it was a fun meeting. So there you go. And I will say that the school building committee will be having its first meeting next Wednesday. Bob Munch and I will be representing the committee. And that will be interesting to see how that all goes. It's a beginning of a fairly lengthy process, likely a very fairly lengthy process. So we'll see where that all stands. Anything else?
I was at the finance meeting on Zoom.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Sometimes you just can't have too much fun.
Speaking of personnel, how positions, do you still have open positions?
We do. We have a open position for world languages at LMWHS. We've actually had some pretty interesting candidates come forward, so we're excited, and interviews happened just recently, and I know the high school interviewing committee is really excited about one of the candidates that they were able to meet with, who is fluent in both Spanish and French. Again, it kind of felt like we're looking for a needle in the haystack, and it sounds like we might have found one, so we're excited about that.
Good.
Well, how about the drama? Is anything more on the drama?
So in the drama, Stephan Billups, the theater manager, has been offering the drama class for kids, and it's been well received. The kids really like them. They're really happy with the work they're doing. They're working right now on putting together a play called Alice in Winter Wonderland. So it's a slight spin on the traditional story. And they're learning, all facets of theatrical production, from acting to, stagecraft and spacing and blocking and all that type of stuff. We'll be working on set design, those types of things later on. And they're interested in putting on at least one performance out of that classroom this year as well. So it sounds like we're going to continue in that direction. We also had a conversation with Shakespeare and Company whether we wanted to contract them. But the feedback I get from the students right now is they really enjoy the work they're doing with Stefan. So I think we're able to have him flex his schedule and kind of do double duty, doing the theater manager and then also this, and being a little bit creative with the way that we use time and scheduling. So I think it was a creative solution to enable us to continue to offer the program, but in a way that was fiscally responsible. So I think that's a win all the way around.
And do we know if Shakespeare's doing their fall festival?
They are.
They are. So that program will be continuing
Yes.
in any case. Good. Anything else? Okay, hearing none, I would accept a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chairman, I move we adjourn.
I'll second that.
Okay, this will call for a roll call vote. Christine Morrow,
Aye.
Megan Kirby,
Megan Kirby, aye.
Bob Vaughn.
Dave Rimler, aye.
Much I.
Aye.
Okay, Megan, I hope you're feeling better. I hope that it looks like you've been struggling a bit.
Getting there.
All right, well, take care of yourself.
All right, thank you.
We'll
See you
see
guys
you
soon.
at our next meeting in